Hello everyone! A little while ago, we did the story of Tirion Fordring. You might remember how they excommunicated him, disconnected from using the light. But not really, for as Tirion put it, man, they could strip him of his armor and titles. They could take away his home and his wealth. But the light, it would always be within him. The human would prove to be right. But there is a case, a weapon capable of disconnecting people from the light. And that is what we're going to be talking about today.
Light. Must remember the light.
For that story, we're going to have to go back in a time before the Dark Portal had even opened up. The Draenei, after declining Sargeras's offer of joining his burning legion, they were on the run, hiding away from his forces. From their own kind that did decide to team up with the Dark Titan. Kil'jaeden especially, he took it quite personal that Velen had declined to join them. He promised that he would hunt them down. And so, for thousands of years, the Draenei, they ran from planet to planet until they could run no more. Their ship, Oshu'gun, was forced to make a crash landing on the planet of Draenor. And there, they would build up a home for themselves, hoping to not be noticed. For a while, their time here, it was quite peaceful. Sure enough, the locals, like the ogres, they weren't too fond of these new settlers, but they didn't really stand a chance against the might of the Draenei. The relations with the orcs, another native race in Draenor, I mean, it was not like they, were feasting at the campsites, but there was no hostility between them, and they mostly kept to themselves, living out their own lives. That is, until Kil'jaeden found them again, and he didn't know that they were stuck on the planet. To avoid the Draenei from escaping his grasp once more, he decided to be a bit more cunning about it and make the local orcs do his dirty work. By pretending to be a benevolent ancestor, he was able to maneuver them from their traditional shamanism to becoming warlocks. Embracing the Fel, magically age their children to increase their numbers, form the Horde, a unified fighting force from the different clans, and ultimately make them drink the blood of Manoroth, shackling their souls to their legion.
Drink, Hellscream. Claim your destiny.
That would be Gul'dan right there. One of the key figures who did not particularly care about his people. He was more invested in getting the promised power from the Legion, and he would do anything it took, anything that Kil'jaeden asked of him, even selling out his own race. So it was that the might of the Horde took down some prime locations of the Draenei, like Karabor or the Black Temple, as you might know it better as. Their might, it was great, near unstoppable, until only Shefrev's city remained to be taken. This city, the Draenei knew, it was going to be doomed from the start, since Prophet Velen, he had foreseen it. At first, he wanted to do a full evacuation, get the people out of there, but that would only stop the Horde for a moment. Their rampage across Draenor, it would not end until they had wiped out all of the Draenei, or, at the very least, until they believed they had. Another plan was made. One where many of their civilians, they would get a chance to flee to safety, but the majority of the military, they would stay behind in the city. They would sacrifice their lives to make the Horde believe that it destroyed them. And Velen vowed to be one of those defenders, to stand with his people and make this ultimate sacrifice. But his followers, they argued against it. In their hearts they knew that Shefrev was doomed to fall. If the race had any hope of survival, it would be under Velen's wise leadership. As much as he might want to, he had a greater path in front of him, a greater goal to fulfill than to die there with them in this battle. While the Orcish clans were setting out from the throne of Kil'jaeden, Velen and the Exarchs, they made the preparations. The prophets led many civilians to Tel'Rador, a remote temple built upon an island in the Zangar Sea. Meanwhile, Rangari scouts harassed the Horde lines, slowing their approach. In Shefrev itself, the Vindicators shored up their defenses. Brave Draenei that you might have seen before, Draenei like Marat, Akama, and of course, Nobundo.
Ora Teramus.
This siege of Shefrev would not just be the clash of steel, fel, and holy power. Gul'dan and the Shadow Council, they prepared something rather special for the Draenei waiting inside by combining their warlock magics with the red pox. And the red pox, that's the disease that occasionally flared up amongst the orcs. Not a disease that they always had to deal with. They in turn got it as a gift from the ogres. And the ogres, they got it by studying the curse of Sepha and experimenting with ways to induce a similar affliction amongst the orcs. This curse of Sepha, its origin. It's a very ancient curse created by the wind serpent god Sepha. You might recall dealing with it during Warlords of Draenor. The curse, it caused the Arakoa affected by it to become wretched and flightless, and it also cut them off from the light of their sun goddess, a goddess called Rukmar. So that curse, in the form of red pox, mixed with a bit of warlock fell magic, it was thrown at the Draenei with siege engines. The bombs exploded against Shefrev's walls and released a foul mist that burned the Draenei's skin and choked the breath from their lungs. A thick, red fog enveloped Shefrev's battlements. As the mist wreaked havoc amongst the defenders, the orcs flooded through breaches in the city walls. Marat, Akama, Nobundo, and thousands of Shefrev's other defenders, they stood firm against the horde's onslaught. Again, they knew they were doomed, and their only wish was to take as many orcs with them as they could. They had not counted on this chemical warfare though, but they fought on all the same. The mist, it had worked its way onto the rise, where it rolled out and covered the stone like a carpet. Nobundo and his fellow Vindicators, they fought on as the mist rose to chest level, then finally to their faces, stinging their eyes and burning their lungs. Nobundo heard the death cries of several of his companions, but he had lost sight of them in the dense red fog. Mercifully, the attacks on him, they seemed to have abated. He stumbled back a step, stifling the urge to vomit. It felt as if his skull was about to burst. Then he heard a horrific battle cry from out of the mist that chilled him to the bone. A shadow approached. Nobundo struggled to see as his body wrenched in spasms. He tried desperately to hold his breath as out of the dense crimson mist stepped a tattooed, fiery-eyed terror, a massive orc covered in the distinctive blue of Draenei blood. Out of breath, twisting a wicked two-handed axe in his grip, this was Gromar's Hellscream. His raven-hued hair clung to his thick chest and shoulders, and his lower jaw had been colored as black as pitch, lending his face the countenance of a skull. Behind him, scores of orcs rushed onto the rise. Nobundo knew that the end was near, and the walls shook once more. The nightmarish orc charged. Nobundo arced back. The blade carved a gash across his chest, rending his armor and numbing his left side. The Draenei answered with a swing of his hammer that crushed the fingers of the orc's right hand, rendering it and the axe he held useless. Then, to Nobundo's horror, the terrifying creature smiled. The orc gripped him with his good hand, and the twin furnaces of his eyes bored into Nobundo, bored through him. He was forced to gasp for air, and as he did, he felt the veneer of his will being stripped away. It was as if some manner of dark, demonic magic was at work, as if a part of his very essence was being obliterated, and it was an assault that he had no answer for. Nobundo vomited thick blood onto the orc's face and chest. He closed his eyes and frantically, desperately hailed the light, besieging it to neutralize the orc just long enough for him to mount the defense. He called out, and for the first time since he had contacted the light and been graced by its blessed radiance, there was no answer. Nobundo had never felt so helplessly lost and utterly alone. If the light was out of reach and he died here, what would become of his spirit? Would the light not receive him? Would his essence be condemned to an eternity of drifting through the void? He had lived his life honorably, yet could this be some kind of punishment? Just imagine what a shock it must have been to suddenly be disconnected from something that's been with you for all those years. His encounter with Gromash, it ended with being knocked off the wall. Not to his demise though. When he regained consciousness, the sound of a female Draenei being tortured by the orcs, it assaulted him from above. Around him, mounds of corpses, still slick with vomit and blood and every manner of waste. Nobundo's heart withered at the sight of the children amongst the dead. Despite their youth, many of them had bravely volunteered to stay with their parents, who knew all too well that the orcs would be suspicious of a Draenei city where no children dwelled, and would hunt the last of their kin to extinction. Now without the light, and being severely wounded, this battle for Nobundo, it was over. There was nothing that he could do here, but perhaps flee and live another day. The path of a coward, he thought to himself, but the path that he took. As the scream stopped for a moment, The orcs discarded the body down below and began working on a fresh new victim as he shambled slowly, painfully into Terakar Forest. Female screams atop Eldor Rise began anew. Nobundo ran away in search of his people, the others that have survived this horrible night at Shefrev, a night that would haunt his dreams for many moons to come. What they didn't know at the time was that the disconnection from the light, it was merely the start, as the curse of Sepha had made the Arakoa wretched and flightless. These Draenei that had inhaled the red mists, they started to devolve into what they would call the Krokul, more commonly known as the Broken. This is where the image of the Draenei being all pure and good, it starts to crumble, as despite people like Velen and Marat telling them to accept these Broken, to accept their brothers and sisters that gave so much for their defense, the people, they feared their mutations. They feared that it would spread to them as well. They even went as far as to say that if the light had abandoned Nobundo, perhaps it had done so with a reason. Who were they to question the ways of the light? Over time, these Broken were cast out, banished, forced to live in the wilds. And these are the wilds of Draenor, with bloodthirsty orcs and demonic forces running around. The change in Nobundo and the others, they continued. Appendages appeared where before there were none. Spots and warts and strange growths spread across their bodies. Their hooves, one of the Draenei's most distinctive features, were entirely gone, replaced by things that now resembled misshapen feet. Nor was such change limited to the purely physical. Their brains struggled more and more to maintain higher functions, and some became lost completely, turning into vacant shells that meandered aimlessly, conversing with audiences that existed only in their minds. Lost ones, we call them. Sometimes they would simply wake up and wander off, never to return. And nearly every day, Nobundo tried to reconnect with the light. And every night, he suffered the same terrible nightmares. Nightmares about Shefrev, about trying to help his people, but being unable to do so. Perhaps it would be better if he just followed the example set by the others, to find a high cliff somewhere, and just let go. This world, it had nothing left for him. It would be so easy to take those final steps, to walk off the edge, and put an end to the misery. But even now, cast out by his own people, ignored by the light, tormented by the souls of those we had failed to save, Nobundo found that he could not give up. In his darkest hour, a voice carried upon the wind. Everything that is alive. After all these years of pleading, Nobundo had finally received an answer. An answer that came not from the light, but it came from the wind. The elements that had been forsaken by the orcs in exchange for their powers over Fel, they now called out to this Broken. Over the next several days, Nobundo returned to the cliff, where he heard whispers carried by the wind, reassurances that he was not alone, promises and tantalizing hints that a wealth of knowledge it awaited him. Sometimes the voice of the wind, it was calm and placating. At others, it was insistent and forceful. All the while, a nagging doubt still lingered in Nobundo's mind, that perhaps he was going mad after all. On the 5th day, as he sat near the cliff's edge, he heard a rumbling sound like thunder, though the sky was clear. He opened his eyes and witnessed a great column of fire erupting beyond the cliff's edge, rising from the fissure below. The flames spread out, and in their flickering dance he could see shifting, nebulous features. And when the fire spoke, it sounded like a great and powerful storm. He was summoned by the elements to come to the mountains of Nagrand, to the throne of elements, but to get there he would have to pass through the camps of the unaffected, where he was no longer allowed entry, but it's kinda difficult to stop someone with the elements on their side. Once he reached the throne, his journey could begin, and from the elements he learned much. Where once it was the orcs that listened to the colors of the wind, their teachings, they're now passed on to this Broken. But these were just the very first small steps. No matter how far my journey takes me, I suppose true understanding, it lies in the knowledge that the journey will never end. And when he was finally ready to return to his people, to share the gift and knowledge that was bestowed upon him, he ran into Velen, the one who had always wanted him to be there, who now assured him that running away from Shefrev was not an act of cowardice, but rather embracing that fate had more than just death in store for him. The road traveled for Nobundo. The sacrifices made, they'd not been easy. Yet through it all, he was still willing to return and help out his fellow Draenei. The ancient customs that once belonged to the orcs, they were now shared amongst his people. Your journey begins with these simple words. Nobundo smiled. The clouds above swirled, lightning arced, and rain poured. Everything that is alive. And he would be there, right at Velen's side, when the time of change came to Outland, formerly known as Draenor. The Naru had answered their call for help. They showed up with the Tempest Keep. Part of it had the Exeter, which Velen, Nobundo, and some of their people, they took it to traverse the stars and end up on Azeroth. This is with the Burning Crusade. And for a long while, Nobundo, he didn't do a whole lot in the story. He mainly played the function as a shaman trainer for the newly added Draenei shamans to the Alliance, and he is willing to share his tale for those that are curious. There was this small bit during Children's Week, where the orphan Dorna shows incredible talent for wielding the elements. But our boy Nobundo, he wouldn't play a major part until the elements desperately needed his aid, starting with the Cataclysm. But that tale and beyond, we're going to save for next week. So for now, thank you very much for watching, everyone. Subscribe if you like my videos, leave a like if you enjoyed this one, and until next time, see ya!